I dedicate this to queer and trans people that fuel pop all around. To the gays who dedicate my songs to someone they love or hate. And thank you to the people who are fans, who listen to me, who hear me when I share my joy and my fears. Thank you for listening. And for all the queer kids in the Midwest watching right now, I see you, I understand you, because I'm one of you. And don't ever let anyone tell you that you can't be exactly who you want to be, bitch.
This is the Culture Study Podcast, and I'm Anne Helen Peterson.
I'm Trish Bendix, a writer in Los Angeles, writer of the Substack Lit Femme.
Okay, so we're recording this the morning after the VMAs, and we just heard Chappell Roan's speech when she accepted the award for Best New Artist. So what did you make of that speech?
I think it was a really interesting thing to experience watching someone who has been so openly queer that hasn't yet had such a nationally televised presence quite yet. Like, she's a huge star, but she hasn't had this opportunity to address people in the way that she did at the VMAs. So I think it was extremely powerful for her to be able to use this opportunity as the Best New Artist, which is, not something that is at all gendered or... like they've changed a lot about the VMAs over the years. Thankfully, it's now moon people,
yes,
as opposed to moon men. So I guess, personally, I felt as if she was speaking on behalf of someone like me as a queer person, in a way that I don't necessarily usually feel included in the speeches like that. And I think there have been a lot of others who identify as maybe pansexual or queer, such as Miley Cyrus, who has definitely addressed and included the queer community in acceptance speeches. But I think in particular, Chappell Roan is just this new phenomenon.
Well, and, it's funny, too, to contrast it with cisgendered straight artists being and thanks to the gays for being my fans, right?
Exactly.
It's important to acknowledge a fan base. I think that used to be radical, when that first started, even Madonna acknowledging that was a huge part of her fan base. But at the same time, there is something that I think can, depending on the delivery, be a little bit paternalistic almost, right? And also just the fact that Chappell Roan was specifically, if you're a queer kid in the Midwest,
yes, I
see you, I am you, right? And
yeah,
you can be whoever you want to be. It was really powerful, I think.
Yeah, I'm from Michigan.
Yeah, you're
so I can 100% relate. And, I'm 40. So I am at this interesting point in my life, and having written about queer women in music, now called Sapphic Pop, has a whole different name since I came out at 20. So I've been doing it for 20 years. So it's at a very interesting point now to watch someone that's about the age I was when I was coming out.
Yeah.
And the difference in how there can be such an openness and such an ability to name, I'm a queer kid from the Midwest on this stage and be celebrated for it in a way that used to have to be thinly veiled, cagey, adjacent, as an ally,
yes.
And so I think Katy Perry performing and having to sing I Kissed a Girl. And then, I think it's just wow, what a juxtaposition that I'm so here for, because it really speaks to a lot of the ways in which we've been able to allow queer women's representation, especially on a national stage or on radio, which I think is an even bigger part of this.
I'm so glad that you are approximately my age, and this is part of the reason we wanted to have you on the show. not because you're older, but because you are invested in historicizing Sapphic Pop.
Yes.
Both very explicitly in your writing. You have this great feature that we're going to link to in the show notes on NBC News about the lineage of Sapphic Pop, but also because you have sense memory of hearing Melissa Etheridge on the radio, right? Or Katie Lang on the radio.
Hell yeah.
Or even Tracy Chapman back when she was first all over the radio, like how there was like, you knew but you didn't know, like there was something that was explicit but also invisible, and like things. I grew up in a small town in Idaho, and like how my mom tried to communicate to me like this person's gay, and the language that she used, you know, she's not like it was not a homophobic thing. It was just like, how do you talk about that? How did the radio talk about it? How did the language of the songs work, right?
Totally.
To be very ambiguous in terms of who is coming to Melissa Etheridge's window.
100%. It was gender neutral. It was vague, but it was very thinly veiled, you know? So,
So I would love to hear how you started thinking, like, why is it important for us to historicize this? Like, why is it important for us to understand that this is not coming out of nowhere?
Right. Well, I think for me, growing up in Michigan and having sort of a sense that I was different somehow, but not being able to name that queerness until age 20, felt particularly as somebody who, you know, wanted to believe that I knew myself, that I was, you know, on a path somewhere, but like just maybe didn't include boys for some reason. Every other girl was worried about that. So come to find out, cliche, go to college, art school, you know, in Chicago, and wow, I'm gay. Well, I mean, for one thing, I felt, wow, I can't believe that I had no sense of self, but also sense of lineage for this being possible.
Right.
And particularly in Michigan, where they have, you know, had for 40 years the longest running Michigan Women's Music Festival, like the largest convening of, you know, not just lesbians, but particularly lesbians around women in music, musical performances, Tracy Chapman having performed there, Indigo girls, like we've like a huge, like this is the precursor to Lilith Fair.
Yep.
And I remember having my consciousness around Lilith Fair was tied to homophobia in the way that I was on a basketball team with a bunch of girls who came back from going to Lilith Fair the first round. I didn't go to the first round. I went to the second round. But, and having photos they had taken of women kissing there and laughing about it. They had they had taken photos of women like, oh, LOL, these lesbians, you know, and me associating Lilith Fair and Melissa Etheridge and Katie Lang and even like Sophie B. Hawkins, or women that were very palpably queer, Tracy Chapman, on the radio, on MTV, and being so intrigued and wanting to be able to enjoy it or identify with it, but feeling scared, feeling like I didn't even know what to do with it. And so I hated that it took me until it took me to be able to have an appreciation, and along the way go back into, you know, as a music critic, as a music writer, why I had devalued women in particular as artists, why I'd fallen into the same thing that most male rock critics do, which is defaulting to like what males think are straight cis males a lot of the time, white, are the most important, or that women are less than, that queer people are less than, even though the entire time queer women, queer people, people of color have been the most creative, arguably the most inventive, and always like invisible in plain sight, you know, whether that's Dusty Springfield, you know, whether that's Nona Hendrix and LaBelle, or songwriters, you know, there's just been so many queer women and queer people that have really been a part of music history that don't get their due. And so it just kind of became a personal mission to find myself in the music that was, you know, available, but also that I wasn't able to connect with in the way that I think now people are able to do with Chaperone, with Billie Eilish, and, you know, before that with Lady Gaga or Madonna, or, you know, so the VMAs are a huge part of this too, you know?
I think that sometimes there is a tendency to evacuate history and be like, can you believe this person is doing this? Like, how incredibly brave of them, right? Without acknowledging all of the very small steps that were taken over time to make what is possible today. And that is true in so many different realms of life. And so I think like it's not just like, well, you don't know how hard it was in the 90s to like someone who was like, to like Melissa Etheridge, right? To say publicly, I like Indigo girls or something like that.
Yep.
So I think before we get to the questions, we should talk about what has actually changed, right? Because like there was basically like a PR mandate that you could like hint at being queer. And it wasn't that you had to like, I don't know, have a fake relationship to make it seem like you were straight, but like record labels, if they wanted a star to be mainstream, there was a very particular way that you could talk about your sexuality, or the way that you had to be even groomed and present yourself in music videos and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And the thinking was you could not attract a broad audience if you were out. So what do you think has changed?
Well, I think there's a lot of different factors, but and that's why it's so important to me to be able to, set this in the context of all the people that and all the work that has been done. But I think that there was probably like a very palpable shift in, like the mid-aughts.
Yeah.
With like, say, 2008, for example, when I Kissed a Girl comes out, and it feels for a lot of people like, wow, this is like the first time we've heard this kind of song about this experience. And even though, of course, for many people who are lesbian identified or didn't appreciate the sort of like bi curiosity aspect of it, or like the permission from the boyfriend and all of that. This was coming out of Madonna, Britney, and Christina Aguilera's kiss on the VMAs. It's like this sort of like titillating bisexuality.
Yeah.
And it's funny because every time it's just like lesbian chic in 1992, it's always like a sort of a trend. It's like, lesbians are cool trend for as long as it's cool, right? So I hope that that's not what's going to be happening now with the Sapphic Pop. I hope that it's going to become just like more par for the course. Like, yes, queer women are just like naturally, headlining Coachella and on the cover of Rolling Stone. Wow. So I think like that being, and Lady Gaga, I think like the Born This Way, the no matter gay, straight or bi, like the whole like, and even though it's been funny to see if she's positioning herself, because she's done it herself, sort of like, is she bisexual, is she an ally, but it's like doesn't really matter. It's more with Lady Gaga, I think, about this sort of like she felt like she was one of us, like is one of us in a way that maybe wasn't. I mean, and Madonna arguably too, but I think there was something about like Lady Gaga, and it's funny to keep coming back to the VMAs, but I think it's just such a like, these things have really played themselves out in MTV because it's been the most available for these kinds of things.
Yeah, and like also an awards show that is open to and courting transgression, however you want to define that. Yeah, so I think it's right that the VMAs are a site of a lot of this like public performance. Yeah,
but then at the same time, you have Same Love, right, on the Grammys. So then this is a huge, and it's like, these are the songs that are come in even if you're not gay and like be with us over here. Cause like, this is where like the cool people are in an Obama America. And it's funny because like, of course I live in a bubble because I live in LA now. When I go home to Michigan in a couple weeks, I'm going to feel like right before the election, especially, it's going to be like, oh no, wait, this is, such a different experience of, and this is what queer kids in the Midwest are up against. So they have a Chapel Roan or they had a Lady Gaga to be like, there is a way to be me, to be queer. And maybe it is now staying in the Midwest as opposed to getting out, because it used to be like, you just got to go to a big city and then you'll be happy and free. But now it's like, I want for there to be the possibility of, enjoying your life, hearing yourself in pop, but then also country, because a lot of people in rural Midwest, even though, country is always assumed to be so Southern, it's like, no, actually, it's like country was huge and is huge. Country is a whole other conversation. But just to say that it is popular music where I'm from. And I think that 2008 era, those early aught era of like sexual fluidity and openness, along with what was going on politically and like, finally getting equal marriage in 2015 and things like that have just led us here in a way that the people like Chapel Roan who have grown up in that era and were songwriting in there and watching RuPaul's Drag Race on television and having access to transgression more and more, this is the future all liberals wanted.
Well, and it's also like, if you look at attitudes about like acceptance of gay people, acceptance of trans people, like it just it always is like there's more acceptance the younger you are, right? So as people have aged into the primary demographic for consuming pop, they're like, yeah, of course it's okay to be an out queer star, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so our questions. We got some really good ones. They're complex.
Yeah, you did.
but I think we can get into them. So this first question comes from Jerry.
Why is there such a strong flavor of the music of the 80s tied to queer pop to this day? You can definitely feel it in Chapel Roan's music and many of her onstage costumes. Did the growing fight for queer liberation in the 80s create a permanent through line? And will we always associate that music with the queer community?
I can't wait for your answer on this.
Well, I mean, so much to think about there because there was a lot going on in the 80s, but I love the addition of asking if it was the political landscape because I absolutely think that organizations like ACT UP had a direct impact on the ways in which we now sort of interact, like in that politics and pop music have kind of come together, like even just thinking about how involved Madonna was with anything to do around AIDS in the 80s and how that was sort of still, it was very stigmatized. It wasn't, someone like her making it okay. Someone like Cyndi Lauper having a lesbian sister and always speaking out against homophobia. In addition to the fact that the music of the 80s was very like, the new wave, the punk,
exactly,
out of disco, like it was queer. It was like queer people. So when, in addition to when AIDS is happening, and then also there's all these, new sort of like musical inventions that people are having fun with, and that is also Culture Club, Queen, George
Michael.
Like a lot of, Wendy and Lisa with Prince. Yep. I mean, that is, right, especially with Sapphic, like that is something I hope that the younger generation looks into Wendy and Lisa, because I definitely see a lot of their influence. And of course, Madonna getting into the early 90s also with her sex book.
Yep.
And, Justify My Love, having like pansexual orgies and things of that nature. Like, anyway, the 80s, I think, were pivotal and making a comeback specifically because even if someone like Chapel Roan doesn't necessarily, I don't want to speak for her and say she doesn't understand or know that history, or where, maybe she hasn't studied Cyndi Lauper's career or Kate Bush's career or anything like that, but it's inevitable that, especially drag queens and people that were a part of, the Vogue ballroom scene, all of it kind of coalesces in the way that we see pop like divas now that greatly influence and always have with like Bette Midler and Barbara Streisand and stuff. But Whitney Houston, queer Sapphic Pop icon, also frequently gets called a gay icon, which I think is, true. But at the same time, I think we also as queer women should definitely claim her and lift her as, one of ours.
Yeah. And that all strikes me as absolutely true. And also we have to just remember that the 80s are in just broadly right now.
Totally.
Yeah, exactly. The 80s and early 90s. And so there are these echoes that are happening across pop. So we could talk about the sound in some of this music, but we also would talk about it in Sabrina Carpenter's music, So So next question. This is also about history, and this comes from Una.
I saw a TikTok on Instagram, to accurately date myself, where the young woman was going on about this festival in the 90s with a female-only lineup called Lilith Fair. And another time, someone posted to Twitter how Chapel Roan was the first best lesbian pop singer, and so everyone retweeted it with photos of the Indigo girls. So what can we do to stop the collective amnesia of female culture? And I'm sure there's got to be a better term for this, but here we are. I've experienced this before, and it's not just pop music. Sometimes it's the work that went into laws that were never passed. Looking at you, ERA.
Okay, so we've talked about this a little bit, but I feel like we should do a little bit of table setting for queer women in the music industry in the 1990s. So
sure.
and just the, you talk about this a little bit in the piece, going back to the 70s and other music festivals, this idea of women's music. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Tell me more.
So women's music was directly out of women's liberation. There were a lot of women coming together for the first time out of gay liberation also, in civil rights. I mean, people were getting politically active and women were coming together. And when women get together, just like they have in any gendered space, like in World War II or, Girl Scouts, there's going to be an opportunity for them to share experiences and make connections that you're otherwise isolated from, right? So I think, or I know that women's music festivals, particularly around the fact that they were particularly lesbians, singing songs about the experience of being a woman who's in love with another woman. And also, I should say, making it a priority to rediscover songs from the past. Like the reason we know about all of that, those past Sapphic songs are from the work of the women who, out of women's liberation, were like, we're going to find, they've been here before, we will identify them and then bring them back into our repertoire or print their lyrics in women's magazines or feminist magazines and things. So women's music festivals really gave women the chance to perform, to Skillshare, to learn how to put on a show at their local YMCA, to run sound, to do a lot of things that empower women in music more broadly, not just the artists. So it was very important. But also, and why Sarah McLachlan started Lilith Fair was because in more mainstream music, it was women were pitted against each other and looked at as competition. And so frequently, unfortunately, it was the case that you wouldn't bring another woman to open for you on tour. You would perform as one woman among many men because there can only be one. There's only room for one. We're only going to play one woman on the radio. And, so that's something that Sarah McLachlan luckily was like, no, I want to play with all these different women that I want to play with. We're going to take it on the road. And all that I think is important now for people to know is that wasn't the first.
Yeah.
It came out of a line of other women who have been doing this work. But I am happy that now the conversation is, well, where did this come from and how do we get here? And then, to say there's a documentary coming out about Lilith Fair next year.
Yes.
That there's, like that there are these opportunities. Yes. No, that's how I felt. When I was like, yay,
No, I was like
finally.
So excited. Yes.
No, and that's how it should be because, Brandi Carlile isn't coming out of nowhere.
Right.
She performed at a small stage at Lilith Fair when it had a, so I think it's so, and I hope that people get excited to learn about all of that because, it's great to have new and exciting and feel like something's first. And like, definitely, I think Billie Eilish and Chappell Roan will have like a lot of firsts as part of their career. But, that just like, I know we're going to talk about this a little bit, but JoJo Siwa saying she invented gay pop, it's just like, just to be accurate because we want to be respectful and also honor what's already been.
I've really appreciated what Brandi Carlile has done in this space because, not only is she obsessed with championing the work of her musical influences, whether that's Joni Mitchell or Tanya Tucker. And Brandi also, she had Sarah McLachlan at a concert the year before that. And she talked so much about how she had been sitting, in the wall, on the wall of the amphitheater at the Gorge, a Washington State kid, watching Sarah McLachlan at Lilith Fair. And that was made, and also all of these other women, right, who were queer.
Yep.
And that was what made her think, like, this future is possible for me. Mm-hmm. She says that explicitly over and over at her concerts. So there's no way that you can forget, like, I am coming from a lineage.
100%. And with the Indigo girls, too, she has been extremely involved with making sure the Indigo girls have gotten their due and that they have and I think it's so important because the Indigo girls, and there's a great documentary that came out about them in the last year that I think is worth any fan seeing. But also in particular, anyone who's interested in how in the 80s being visibly lesbian and trying to have a major label career and what you're sort of allowed to say or how you decide as a person who's been living out already.
Right.
And, especially for them, it's like there was two of them. So they had to then agree,
okay,
we're both going to be gay. So it's like, but Brandi Carlile finding the Indigo girls, just like many other, women, whether they're queer or not, just being able to find something in their music that wasn't available elsewhere because, but then also knowing that they're gay and just being like, good with it, whether that's because you're attracted to them or because you find commonality in that way, or because, you know, you just happen to find something particular in their songs that connects with you. But I think, you know, that's what I want people to understand too. It's like, not every song has to be explicitly lesbian for a lesbian artist or a queer artist or a sapphic artist, a sapphic song to have to land with you in some way. And I think like people are now just more open. Radio, it can be played on the radio without it being, I was in a nail salon the other day before school started with all the kids. So little girls were in there with their moms getting their nails done. And we were listening to Chapel Roan, knee deep in the messenger seat and you're eating me. And I just like loving it because, you know, it's the lyrical content's probably going over their head. But, you know, the idea of this being just like part of the landscape now is exciting to me in a way that I just never really felt. Like with Melissa Etheridge, of course I could hear it and I knew gay and like, but it's different. It is more explicit. And I think that there's a power in that is just really fun to think about.
You know, I connected to the Indigo Girls when I was a teenager because they spoke so explicitly and rawly about like love and feeling and like just like there was no shame or runaround. It was like, I'm in love with your ghost, you know? Like I just I loved it.
They were great songwriters. They are great songwriters.
Oh my gosh, they are great songwriters. And I also appreciate, like, I don't want to give too many laurels to like a white straight guy, but Bon Iver loves Indigo Girls. And that was the first time that I saw them as an adult was at one of his festivals because he was
nice.
They are huge influences on him. And even
I know,
like
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, me too. That is just like, yeah, they're really good musicians and I love them and I want them here at my festival.
Right. We don't need your approval, Bon Iver, but we will take it and we will love it because that's the thing is like I say we, but like queer women, like they deserve the respect at the very least of people for their part in moving the needle forward with music, if not in queerness and visibility. Like they don't owe us the visibility or you know it's like but they have given something to music that is across the board, and I think that when people acknowledge that is so helpful, whether they are a straight guy, white guy or whatever. It's like this is exactly what I want for them, is just to give just to get credit, you know.
Okay, so. This is a good setup too for our next question, which comes from Elise.
What are the straights finding so compelling about these queer artists? As a queer person who is the target audience, I'm so happy they're seeing success, but I don't totally get what straight folks are loving.
I mean, this is like queer people like straight artists too, you know? Like right? Like
I know, I kind of laughed. I love it.
I understand where the question is coming from.
No,
for
totally.
Sure.
Me too.
So we can talk about that, but I also think like, you know, like music doesn't have to be addressed to you for you to love it, I guess.
Yeah, it is funny because I think like really it's like why now? Kind of like why is this? Why are they finally catching up? Because truly, it's like people have been fans of, you know, George Michael, Whitney Houston, you know, people that are queer like for a long time. But I think like the explicit nature of it is, you know, one thing. Chapel Roan, I think, is such a focus of a lot of these questions around this because I think like somebody like her nature of performing versus someone like Billie Eilish is a little bit different. And I think straight people just like love Billie Eilish and she can do no wrong. But like Chapel Roan, why she's been able to build up her own following without having the kind of platform that Billie Eilish has had for a couple years, you know, is that I think a lot of her story in her album is about going through this like self-discovery and being able to find who she is. And yes, that includes for her specifically being a queer person. So that queer people like really are drawn to that. But I think generally, more broadly, that's something that people of all identities can hear. And, you know, especially with her like catchy bops, like there's no way to not already just like connect with that when you hear them, I think. But I think that she has this ability to, especially with young people that have grown up with RuPaul's Drag Race on television and Lady Gaga and things of that nature. I think it's kind of a little bit more par for the course, but also exciting in that she's like reinventing some things that we might, as a 40-year-old, I might know has been referenced from elsewhere, but that she also isn't afraid to give credit to. and so, like, she's a Karen Carpenter fan, which I think is amazing.
Yeah.
Like, I love Karen Carpenter. And so I can hear, like, so then when I can hear some of that in her work, which is great. Anyway, so I think straight people have been loving queer artists for so long that now it's even more acceptable, that it's probably just more palpable for an artist like Chappell Roan, who is such a, I hate to use the word spectacle because I don't know if that's exactly what I mean, but just like when you are watching her, she's putting on a show in a way that feels like she borrows from burlesque. She says she borrows from drag. It's just like it's like what queer people have been doing, but that straight people are now finally in a place of acceptance because they don't feel like they'll be labeled as queer if they're participating.
Yeah, no, I think that's super real. That's super real, right? Like there isn't this like amorphous, well, I think there is for some people still, but I think for younger people in North America, I think that like you can put it on your playlist and there isn't this fear like there was in the 90s and before of like, oh, are you gay?
100%.
That you would have to like have this conversation, this tiresome, onerous conversation filled with homophobia. So I think that's part of it.
I mean, the Indigo girls in their documentary discuss like how their name would be used as a punchline, as a joke, as a euphemism for lesbians.
Yes.
And now I don't think that I would not expect there to be jokes in the same way about Chappell Roan. Like I can't even imagine. It feels like tacky or distasteful, and that's amazing. You know?
Yes, right? You're like, that's a dumb joke. And it always has been a dumb joke, but now it's like, no, that's a really dumb joke.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so next question. Melody wants us to get to this question. This is like a semi-related question, but it's not like a listener question.
Do not say I wanted it. Just tee up the question.
No, so we did get a question from a listener who wanted to know why so many songs included references to oral sex.
I saw that, yeah. I loved thinking about it. I really did love thinking about it.
And like, we should clarify that there have been songs referencing blowjobs for like decades. Years. I think this person is asking about cunnilingus. I do think that it has been understood, you know, just like the way in the long history, even of straight sex, right, that like cunnilingus is somehow like feminizing and abject in a way that like a blowjob is not, right? So what do you think's going on here?
Yeah, it's so funny because I always think about how DJ Khaled made that like, you know, ridiculous remark about like, I don't do that. And like everyone felt so bad for his wife. And it's like, you know, yeah, that's fucked up. I'm sorry for swearing.
No, you can swear. It is
okay.
It's also it's such like a retrograde understanding, right? Like
yeah.
Like
no,
sounds
so
like
you're so right. It's feminizing.
Yeah,
and I think that it's so amazing that this is happening now because it really does speak to how women are being able to own their sexuality more generally. Yes. So whether it's like you're eating another woman, she's eating you, to use the eat that girl for lunch is what I'm thinking. That's why I use that particular turn of phrase. But, you know, I loved Someone when Lunch first came out, remixed Constant Craving and Lunch, Katie Lang. And I was like, yes, because this, again, like the whole idea of like being devoured or, you know, this kind of thing. I mean, yes, we are talking about cunnilingus. Like, I mean, I guess more directly, Chappell Roan is saying, you know, eating me out in the passenger seat. Lunch, I see, is more like just sort of, I mean, it's a through line, but it's not, the song isn't necessarily about cunnilingus, but like it is, you know, cunnilingus is mentioned, right? Or is referenced. Yeah. It's more about like, oh, I just need this girl. Like, I just want it. And everybody can connect to that feeling. Like, and just like, you know, just starting with such a, the way that is immediately understood if you want to eat somebody for lunch, what that feeling is, you know? So the fact that it's about another woman and the fact that it gives you like this very, this image or whatever it is that you picture, but it has to do with that. I mean, it's sexy. It's kind of like, it makes you want to kind of like bite your lip or something. It like just gives you this palpable feeling. And so I think it's less about the actual act, but I will say that part of like lesbian culture for so long has been my neck and my back. Yes. Like you cannot go like lesbian parties, like DJs will be playing my neck and my back. And it's like, because there's such a power to be able to feel like we have anything close to resembling what might be like, you know, to be giving or receiving something that doesn't have to do with a man telling us, and this is in hip hop too, like women lately have been, whether they're receiving it have been like, you're eating, eat this cookie,
right.
Like that. And I am loving it. I love it. I'm on board.
I also recommend that people, if you haven't heard Constant Craving, because I think if you are slightly younger than us, you might not have heard it. And it is an incredible song. So it will evoke some feelings in you and we will put it in the show notes for sure.
Right.
Yep. Okay. So this is our last question and it comes with a built-in segue. So let's hear from Love.
I think we can't talk about Sapphic Pop without talking about JoJo Siwa, who infamously claimed to have created the genre of gay pop just a few months ago. I've noticed that all the pushback and the very real amount of hate she's gotten online has either been about this gaffe or about her general self-imposed oversaturation on social media. But almost none of the hate I've seen has been because she's gay. Instead, it seems like she gets to somewhat safely be a spectacle of a quite young, extremely out gold star lesbian. Is this true, or is it the Instagram algorithm somehow hiding the homophobic comments from me? And is it true of the other queer pop girlies like Billie Eilish and Chapel? Have we reached a world where homophobia of this type is mostly dead?
Okay, so we will play the clip from JoJo Siwa for people fortunate enough to not know it.
The genre is, I said it back in the day when I first signed with Columbia, I said I wanted to start a new genre of music. And they said, what do you mean? And I said, well, it's called gay pop. And they were like, what's that? And I was like, it's like K-pop, right? But it's gay pop.
I love JoJo Siwa. Like, I feel a lot of compassion for her. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, I think she plays a particular role in popular culture that might not necessarily be musical for people.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, I think she, God bless her for trying to make music. I think she's not really a singer. I think she's a wonderful dancer. She's a great dancer. Like, her role is being so out and proud, and I don't know if the gold star part is important to anybody, but, being so herself after being a child star who has made, millions of dollars with young girls in particular, but also boys and, other gender nonconforming people. But, I know, I have friends who are parents with their daughters who I would, read them JoJo Siwa books before they went to bed at night,
Yep.
So I'm she is I think probably her queerness is so not important to people in a way that is great. But I also feel that if you asked her, I'm sure she has a lot of experiences with homophobia that would probably change the way that we feel about it. I think she does get a lot of hate from gay people that aren't going to. So maybe on, because like I said, I feel like I live in a bubble, like a queer bubble, right? So most of my algorithm is probably going to show me maybe queer people who are like, ugh, JoJo Siwa, she thinks she invented gay pop. And the sentiment is going to be less about anti-gay and more just eye roll, corny kind of thing.
Totally.
So it might be an algorithm thing because I'm sure and certain that queer women get homophobic based hate. But sometimes I think maybe homophobia is baked into more general hate, or maybe sometimes people are exhibiting internal homophobia on people this way. So it's hard to say. I think, unfortunately, I see a lot of queer people not really loving Miss Siwa, but I think it's probably also part of the fact that she did say something that is upsetting to people, which is, you're not inventing something that hasn't already been going on and that you're blessed to be a part of, because you wouldn't be able to be out if other gay pop stars hadn't come out first.
Right. And when you get so much more representation, which I don't love that word, but at the same time, it's part of what we're talking about here. She doesn't have to be the spokesperson. She's not the only one. One of the privileges of expanding representation is being I don't like that person, and I don't have to like that person just because she's an out gay pop star. You know what I mean?
Exactly. I know. For real though, it's I don't have to listen to her music. I can still appreciate that she is doing her thing, but I don't have to engage with it necessarily.
I think a lot about how she probably had people in her life, whether it's publicists, media handler, part of her team that told her that she shouldn't be publicly gay.
Totally. Oh, yeah. No, I feel the same way. I mean, that's why it's I feel, she definitely can put her foot in her mouth with things of, that nature. But I think I definitely do feel compassion for her, too. But she definitely knows how to brand herself.
Yes.
She's good at capitalism.
She's so so good at capitalism. Like, oh my God.
So, I don't feel that bad.
No. I want to be clear. Like, I think it's okay to talk shit about it. But I also like, that's just. Okay. So the other day we were recording a podcast episode about women's sports. And like, women's sports have never been more popular, never been more visible. And also trans panic and like chromosomal testing in women's sports.
Right.
Like, there's never been more anxiety about who is allowed to be in these sports. And so like, I think part of the question, or something that we just want to try to address, is how do we square the visibility, the popularity of queer pop, of explicit descriptions of gay sex, right? Like, it is such an incredibly visible part of our pop culture moment, with so much political anti-LGBTQ plus sentiment. Like, what do you think that those are connected? Like, as part of the backlash, like this idea that like liberals and gay people are trying to take over the media and turn everyone trans. Like, I do think that's part of the messaging on the right.
I think that this is like completely related in a way that is probably not even been like fully investigated, but probably should be more. And I actually have like friends that have been doing a lot of great work. My friend Kate Sussin at the 19th, if you're familiar with that publication, does a lot of great coverage on connecting some things like this. But I think in particular with like Sapphic Pop and the idea of people investing in artists who are not afraid to speak out about political things of this nature. Like, and even like with somebody like Taylor Swift, you know, coming out with an endorsement for Kamala, it's like, I've never been more excited, I feel like, to see the support from queer artists in a way that they're not afraid to put themselves out there for something political or against the drag bans or, you know, I feel like there's a lot more of the two being weaved together because like, so say, okay, the Indigo girls, for example, they've been on this last tour they just toured with Melissa Etheridge, which amazing. What a package duo. But anyways, when they were on tour, they had behind them this huge, the backdrop was all banned books, right? So it's like a bunch of like the, you know, anything that people would put under the idea of like critical race theory or queer LGBT related things. Like, I just thought, wow, what an incredible way to include that.
Right.
Because
it's all related. Because it's all related.
Right. It's all related, right? So I feel like the fact that conservatives in particular are so willing to use this as, you know, to use like panic over trans people, limiting their abilities to be able to get gender surgery or access to hormones or anything of that nature. Like, I think they're using the fervor, like almost like the positive fervor of like LGBTQ people and allies to try to inspire more fear in people that are maybe in the Midwest but think they don't know a queer person, you know? And then unfortunately you have public facing people like Caitlyn Jenner, you know, who are using their public platform to sort of, you know, feed into those fears, which doesn't help. So anyway, I mean, it's all related, but all this to say that I think it's extremely powerful that in the face of all of these terrible initiatives and policies that conservatives are trying to incite fear in people and transphobia and homophobia and all of that. I mean, it's nothing new, but at the same time, it's definitely more of a focus and included in a presidential debate. Even the word transgender being included in the presidential debate is because we are so much more visible and palpable and in their faces, and they perceive that as, you know, being a threat to their power and the patriarchy.
Totally.
So good.
Yes. Like, it's like the more visibility, the more fear.
Mm-hmm.
On days when I'm feeling optimistic, it feels like the last gasp.
Yeah.
Like, it's just like all of this anger and fear of a group of people who just like are terrified of change and of losing control of like people they think are like them, like being in charge of culture, deciding what is popular. So that's right. At least I hope, right? Like, or we're just gonna go. We're in a complete regression, and everything's gonna be bad for another 100 years.
No, it's real. Like, control of bodies, control of identity. To control is the right word. Like, and that is why it's so amazing that these queer women are like, no, I'm fucking Joan of Arc. Like, And chaperones on the VMA's red carpet saying, you don't fucking talk to me like that, photographer. Or, you know, like being able to not feel like you can't be yourself, set boundaries, say this is not okay. You know, like the things that I think especially queer people and women and people of color, or that you're just lucky to be here. You should be so grateful you have a record contract. You should, you know, like we'll do this if you agree to this, you know? So it's like, no, actually you can be a chaperone, get dropped from your record label, continue to work on it, you know, your music anyway, in the face of all that.
Yep.
And find a cult following and then become a massive superstar. So there you go.
Yeah. Okay. So to close the show, I would love for us to talk about some artists that are part of the Sapphic Pop movement that you think people should listen to. Some of them can be new. Some of them can be older. I just like, what's your, like, who's on your playlist? But this answer and my own recommendations are today's Ask Ann Anything. So only paid subscribers get to hear it. If you need more Sapphic Pop in your life, head to culturestudypod.substack.com and sign up. Trish, where can people find you on the internet if they want to find more of your work?
Sure. So I would direct people to my Substack. It's called Lit Femme. And that's where I you know, because I'm a full-time hustler, a freelancer, so I live in a lot of different places. But my Substack is where I write a lot about queer women culture and history and contextualizing these things. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, join my little community.
Amazing. Thank you so much. This has been like a true delight.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening to the Culture Study Podcast. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We have so many great episodes in the works, and I promise you don't want to miss any of them. If you want to suggest a topic, ask a question about the culture that surrounds you, or submit a question for our subscriber-only advice time segment, check the show notes for a link to our Substack. If you want to support the show and get bonus content, head to culturestudypod.substack.com. It's $5 a month or $50 a year, and you'll get ad-free episodes, an exclusive advice time segment, weekly discussion threads for each episode, and a link to a special Google form so that your questions go to the front of the line. The Culture Study Podcast is produced by me, Anne Helen Peterson, and Melody Rowell. Our music is by Poddington Bear. You can find me on Instagram at Anne Helen Peterson, Melody at Melodious47, and the show at Culture Study Pod. Thank you so much for your support.